Our next lesson for level one tutor training is talking about the role of the tutor. And specifically for us, we are talking about the role of the peer tutor because that's what you all are, or at least the good majority of you. So for this lesson, we are going to take a look at some chapters in a book that's really informative and gives a lot of good background information for training for tutors, and talks about the role of a peer educator. And for our in-person training, we read the pages in groups and annotated them as you read. So we had markers or highlighters, pens, pencils, whatever you wanted, and the students and part-time workers would take notes as they read in their groups. So I'm going to read aloud this chapter. If you want to stop it and read it on your own, you can totally do that. If you want to follow along as I read, you are free to do that as well. But you should be marking things that stand out to you as you read through it. This should be an interactive process as you read. I'm going to ask you at the end to share out some things from your reading. So if you want to be thinking about those or marking them as you read, you can do that as well. But you can also mark things that don't have anything to do with this 3-2-1. So the 3-2-1 that you're going to share out at the end is three parts that are new or interesting to you or your group, if you were with a group, two connections that you made, and one question that you have. So if you come across things that fit with that 3-2-1 and you would like to mark them, please do that. Or if there are other things that you just think are important to mark, things that are important for you to remember as a peer educator, please mark those in the reading. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the PDF of the chapter. This is posted for you in the Canvas course. So you can pull that up and follow along if you like, or you can also have a printed out copy if that's easier for you to annotate on. So the first section of chapter 1 says, what is a peer educator? For the purpose of this text, peer educators are defined as tutors, supplemental instruction leaders, academic mentors, and similar student leaders who provide academic support and enhancement at the post-secondary level. Peer educators tend to work in student learning or academic assistance centers, tutoring or writing centers, developmental studies departments, or other educational support programs in 2-year or 4-year colleges and universities. Typically, peer educators are undergraduate students, though at some institutions, graduate students, staff members, or professional tutors lead academic assistance sessions. Peer educators lead tutorial sessions, either one-on-one or in small groups, or in course-based sessions. Course-based sessions refer to regular discussion, homework, or review sessions for students students enrolled in targeted sections of courses. Models of course-based assistance include supplemental instruction, peer-led team learning, peer-assisted study sessions, structured learning assistance, peer assistance learning, and comparable programs. At many institutions, peer educators provide a major and sometimes the only component of academic assistance for the undergraduate student body. Role of a peer educator. As you probably recall, the academic expectations of students at the post-secondary level differ greatly from the expectations of students still in high school. In elementary through high school, adults, teachers, and administrators are responsible for the education of children, students. On the other hand, at the post-secondary level, students are considered to be independent adults responsible for their education. As adults, students register for their courses and decide whether to go to class and whether to complete schoolwork. Additionally, students in college receive their final grades as well as the bill for their education. This transition from education as a child to education as an adult can be daunting for students, especially for traditionally aged students who moved directly from high school to college. A major role of the peer educator is to guide students from dependent, childlike learning that they were accustomed to in high school toward more independent, adult-like learning that is expected of them in college. The term pedagogy refers to instruction of students as children. The term andragogy refers to instruction centering on students as adults. Malcolm Knowles, 1980, summarized key differences between pedagogical and andragogical learning. These differences form a basis for describing a peer educator's role, which is to guide the college student from learning as a child, pedagogy, toward learning as an adult, andragogy. Figure 1.1 summarizes key differences between pedagogical and andragogical approaches toward instruction. So now we'll look at figure 1.1, pedagogy versus andragogy. So we have along the left-hand side different categories, and then across the top, what pedagogy looks like, learning as a child, what andragogy looks like, learning as an adult, and then some examples for peer educators. So for self-concept in pedagogy, students are dependent on instructors to manage learning. In andragogy, learning as an adult, students are independent and self-directed. Instructors guide students toward assuming responsibility for their learning. In an example for peer educators, students bring at least one question to each session. Experience for learning as a child. Students have narrow ranges of experiences. Students receive information from the experienced instructors. Learning as an adult, students have wider ranges of academic and personal experiences, which are valuable resources in a learning setting. In an example for peer educators, students supply examples that explain a concept. Readiness for learning. Instructors employ standard step-by-step curricula based on students' developmental readiness according to age and grade. And then for adults, students' social and career interests determine content. Instructors include relevant real-life activities as well as social interaction. And then an example for us, pairs of students work together on an activity. Orientation toward learning. For children, students acquire knowledge for future use. Instruction is organized according to subject and difficulty levels. For learning as adults, students expect learning to be for current use. Instruction includes problem-centered content and higher-level thinking. Our example, the leader presents a complicated multi-step problem that students solve. And then finally, motivation to learn. For children, students are motivated by external rewards and punishments. For adults, students are motivated by curiosity and internal incentives to improve and master the content. In our example, at the end of a session, students identify what they learned and what they need to improve on. We have an activity that goes with this for andragogy and peer assistance. A goal of peer assistance at the post-secondary level is to develop independent, responsible, lifelong learners. To maximize the success of students with whom they work, peer educators should incorporate the 5 components of andragogy or adult learning as listed in figure 1.1 under the column andragogy, learning as an adult. Read the examples listed in the far right column. Then add other examples of how peer educators can incorporate each of the 5 components. Explain each example to another peer educator. Have either of you observed this strategy? Facilitator of learning. A major responsibility of peer educators is to assist students with how to learn college-level content. Skillful peer educators employ techniques that show students how to understand and remember difficult subject matter. As such, peer educators guide or facilitate students' learning. Bear in mind that peer educators do not present themselves as experts on the subject matter or as substitute teachers or professors. In the peer educator role, it is quite acceptable to be unsure of an answer or to tell students, I don't know. However, as a facilitator of learning, it is crucial that you guide students regarding how to solve the problem or how to find the needed information. peer educators' role and development of students. Your responsibility to guide students toward more independent, adult-like learning refers to all students regardless of age. Though older, non-traditional students tend to be more physically and emotionally mature and more focused on career choices, they still approach college-level academics with many of the same needs as do traditional 18 to 22-year-old students. Arthur Chickering, 1993, created a universal model describing the psychosocial development of college students. This model consists of 7 vectors, each highlighting an area of affective, social, intellectual, or personal development. And these are highlighted in Figure 1.2. As a framework explaining college students' evolving behaviors and attitudes, Chickering's model is useful in your peer educator role. Note that the 7 vectors do overlap and are not linear in nature. Students progress through the vectors with varying speeds, directions, and amounts. In Figure 1.2, the right-hand column contains examples of how you, the peer educator, can boost the development, competence, and confidence of students in your academic support sessions. Each of these items is clarified within the chapters of this book. As a concluding activity in Chapter 9, you will be directed back to Figure 1.2 with the purpose of adding other examples. Figure 1.2, Student Development and Peer Educators. In the left-hand column, we have students' psychosocial development, Chickering's vectors, and it gives us the categories for those. And in the right-hand column, we have examples of the peer educator's role. So category 1 says developing intellectual, physical, and interpersonal competence. And here are examples of how the peer educator can help do that. You can actively involve each student in your sessions. You can call on students by name and wait for them to answer questions. You are viewed as a model student. Therefore, you pass on recommended learning and study behaviors to students. Provide regular feedback to students to increase their sense of competence and confidence with coursework. Managing emotions. Provide plenty of reassurance for both novice and returning students. Incorporate anxiety-reducing techniques in your sessions. Encourage students to develop a supportive network of family and friends. Refer students who seem overly anxious, angry, or depressed to the campus counseling center. Category 3, moving through autonomy toward interdependence. Suggest that students organize their own study group for difficult courses. Let students know that you expect them to complete homework and attempt problems before attending your session. In your sessions, have students figure out answers to questions and problems. Provide opportunities for students to assist others. Show students how to monitor their own learning and performance in courses. Category 4, developing mature interpersonal relationships. For group and course-based sessions, periodically direct students to sit beside and introduce themselves to a person they don't know. Incorporate collaborative activities. Periodically mix up groupings so that students are working with different people. Females more than males tend to welcome collaborative activities. Create a welcoming and comfortable setting in your sessions. Do not tolerate sexist, racist, or other bigoted comments in your sessions. Establishing self-identity. Showcase those behaviors and attitudes that are related to success. Encourage students to assess personal weaknesses and areas of improvement, and then encourage them to seek advice about how to improve. Encourage students to provide personal examples when explaining concepts. Category 6, developing purpose. Work with students on setting personal goals. Relate a subject matter to individual career goals. Refer students who are undecided about a major or career to the campus career services office. And category 7, developing integrity. Incorporate activities requiring higher level thinking and reasoning skills, such as defending points of view or providing evidence supporting an opinion. Call attention to the personal satisfaction that comes with mastering a subject and understanding content thoroughly. Have students review their individual and collective accomplishments. Direct students to evaluate the working group's productivity and members' contributions. So we are now at the end of chapter 1 for the role of a peer educator. You should have been annotating as we read together. And now you will answer the 3-2-1 that is posted in the Canvas course. So again, 3 parts that were new or interesting to you in the chapter, 2 connections that you made to anything in the chapter, and then 1 question that you have after reading.